Okay, so today we're diving into something really big, honestly, and that is how we all get our news these days.
Yeah, it's a constantly shifting landscape, right? I mean,
Yeah.
especially with the rise of, AI and digital media in general, it's changing everything.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been doing a lot of, reading and research and even thinking back on our own experiences, and it's clear that things are changing quickly, and it's not always easy to keep up.
Totally.
That's why we wanted to bring in an expert,
hmm
someone who's been, right in the middle of this evolution.
Well, we're very fortunate to have Dimitar Semkov joining us.
Yep.
He's a co-founder of Pod Tepeto, which is a news outlet that's been a fixture in Plovdiv, Bulgaria for over 16 years.
Yeah, so Dimitar's got that on-the-ground perspective.
Right, like he's seen all of these changes happen firsthand.
Dimitar, welcome to the Deep Dive. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our goal today is to really understand the impact of digitalization and AI on journalism.
Exactly. Especially in the Bulgarian context. But also, we're going to zoom out and talk about what this means for, how you, our listeners, consume news and understand what's going on in the world around you.
Yeah, how do we even make sense of the news today? There's so much of it.
Right, exactly.
Dimitar, you've been with Pod Tepeto for 16 years.
Yes.
Like witnessing all of this happen.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the way that news consumption has evolved over, say, the last decade?
It's been pretty remarkable to see the shift. One of the biggest changes has been this move away from sort of those big traditional media giants.
Yeah.
Digitalization has really opened the door for what you might call people media. Individual journalists who are building their own platforms,
Right.
reaching their audience directly. The technology now exists,
Yeah.
various apps and platforms that allow journalists, especially those who've already built a personal brand at larger outlets, to reach their audience through things like podcasts and newsletters on platforms like Substack.
Yeah, like Substack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really importantly, they have the potential to make money from their content.
Okay, so it seems like that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is empowering.
For individual journalists.
Definitely.
But you mentioned earlier that the Bulgarian market has its own unique sort of nuances.
Yeah, the Bulgarian market is relatively small. We're talking about a population of, 5 to 6 million people, and realistically, only a portion of those are actively seeking out news and information.
Yeah.
So it's tough for an individual journalist to directly monetize that relatively limited audience.
Yeah.
And, while globally we see this trend of individual content creators really thriving,
Yeah.
the economic realities in Bulgaria make it a much steeper uphill climb. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that because the tools to create and distribute media are now so widely available, there's this perception that journalistic work itself is less valuable.
Right.
And we're seeing a rise in what some might call pseudo-journalistic content.
Pseudo-journalistic.
Yeah, it might look and sound like professional news, but it often lacks the rigor, the standards, the fact-checking.
Yeah, it's that kind of blurring of the lines.
Exactly.
Right. And it's interesting because at the same time, people are getting more and more of their news from social media.
Yeah.
Facebook, Instagram.
TikTok.
Yeah. And I'm curious, Dimitar, for established independent news outlets like yours,
hmm
what challenges does that create? Because you guys are really committed to quality journalism, investing the time and resources.
It's definitely a difficult situation.
Yeah.
And not unique to Bulgaria. Globally, authoritative media organizations, the ones that are investing heavily in good journalism,
Right.
often find it difficult to compete with the reach of these social media giants.
Right.
A lot of established media are moving towards subscription models, essentially putting their content behind paywalls. And in many Western countries, there's more of a willingness to pay for good journalism.
Yeah.
People understand the value of it. But here in Bulgaria, it's still a huge challenge to convince people to subscribe to online news.
So it's almost like there's a tension,
Yeah.
right? Because the places where people are actually getting their information, they might not be seeing that, in-depth, high-quality, fact-checked journalism.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, we have this whole other layer of disruption happening.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
AI.
Yeah, and AI can generate articles, it can summarize information, it can even spot errors.
Wow.
So, Dimitar, from your perspective at Pod Tepeto, how are you seeing AI start to influence the way that news is actually created within media organizations?
Well, it's undeniable that
Mhm.
AI is going to have a huge impact. Like any new technology, There are both potential benefits and drawbacks.
Yeah.
I think AI will likely automate some of the more routine tasks involved in putting together the news. Potentially, it could connect readers and content creators faster or more directly.
Yeah.
And in terms of factual reporting, AI could be really valuable for checking information and, catching mistakes.
Right.
But when it comes to offering nuanced opinions or in-depth analysis,
Right.
AI might be able to mimic that to some extent.
Yeah.
But I believe that ultimately audiences are going to value genuine human perspectives, human insights.
I think that makes a lot of sense. The human element, those unique viewpoints, that's hard for a machine to replicate.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Now we know that the adoption of AI isn't happening at the same pace everywhere. So, Dimitar, how would you compare the use of AI in Bulgarian journalism to what you're seeing in maybe more technologically advanced European countries?
Yeah. Is Bulgaria falling behind? Or is there a reason for the way things are?
That's an interesting question. I don't think Bulgarian media is necessarily that much less informed than our Western counterparts.
Okay.
There's almost a more traditional approach in some outlets that I've seen. Some were still heavily reliant on print until relatively recently.
Wow.
Interesting.
But I do think there's a lot of untapped potential for AI, particularly in areas like investigative journalism, digging into big data sets and processing information more efficiently. It seems like those capabilities aren't really being utilized yet.
So maybe there's still a focus on those established methods.
Yeah, perhaps.
And that makes sense. But as AI-generated content becomes more and more sophisticated, it's going to get harder for the average person to tell the difference between what's written by a human and what's created by a machine. What do you think about that, Dimitar? Do you think people will be able to distinguish?
And how can news organizations be transparent about when they're using AI?
Well, there's an interesting example that comes to mind.
Okay.
Club Z, a news outlet in Sofia, actually did a pilot project where they very clearly labeled any content that was produced by AI.
Okay.
And they found that the audience reaction was generally positive.
Oh, wow.
People didn't seem to mind the AI as long as it was disclosed.
Interesting.
I tend to agree with that. I think people will get used to seeing AI content. But interestingly, I think that might actually increase the value of, real journalists.
Yeah.
People with expertise, people with their own opinions.
Right. Right. So that transparency helps.
Exactly.
To build trust
Okay.
and distinguish the human element.
Okay, but let's talk about something that's maybe a little bit more concerning.
Right.
Which is the potential link between fake news and AI.
Yeah.
Dimitar, how easy is it to create and spread fake news using these AI tools?
It's unfortunately not difficult at all, and I think we're going to see that trend continue. I mean, a significant amount of fake news is already being generated with the help of AI.
Right.
And the basic principle is you just feed the AI system a bunch of data, and you guide its reasoning in a particular direction.
So you're essentially training it to create.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the most effective fake news often incorporates real elements, things that make it seem more believable, harder to disprove. And as AI gets better at generating text, images, even videos, it's going to be really difficult to tell the difference between legitimate journalism and, deliberately misleading information.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, into the future, what do you think the future of journalism looks like in this evolving digital and AI-driven world?
Right. How do news organizations need to adapt to stay relevant?
Adaptability is going to be essential.
Yeah.
I think news organizations need to be very flexible. Individuals within editorial teams, those who have traditionally focused on just creating content, they might need to become experts in using AI tools to enhance their work.
Right.
I think in the near future, AI could play a big role in improving how news is presented.
Yeah.
Things like automatically generating catchier headlines or improving text clarity,
Yeah.
But also believe that the traditional model of large editorial teams as they operate now, it's going to become less effective.
Yeah.
Efficiency and embracing technology, that's going to be key.
Dimitar, this has been so insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your firsthand experiences with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
A truly fascinating conversation, Dimitar.
Yeah, it really was. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've really seen how digital technologies have already had a huge impact on the media landscape, shifting influence and creating new challenges, especially here in Bulgaria. Yeah, and now we've got AI coming into the picture,
Right.
adding another layer of complexity.
Yeah.
It's bringing exciting possibilities for efficiency, but also some serious risks,
Right.
especially when it comes to the spread of misinformation.
Right. And that leads us to a really important question for you, our listener.
Yeah.
As AI becomes more integrated into how news is created and shared, how are you going to navigate this new information environment? Think about the balance between the speed and reach of AI in news and the importance of human insight, expertise, and careful judgment in journalism. How will you evaluate the information you encounter in this rapidly changing world?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It is.
That's the end of our deep dive for today.
Yes, it is.
We'll be back next week with another thought-provoking topic.
So until then, stay curious.
And stay informed.